Namaste and very good morning to all. We are together here at Sahitya Akademi, Temsula Ao and the Northeast Symposium, especially Symposium on Temsula Ao. On behalf of Sahitya Akademi, I welcome all the participants as well as the viewers who are watching us live on the YouTube. The program of the symposium is like inaugural session in Professor Jyotirmay Pradhani ji will make introductory remarks, and inaugural session will be chaired by Professor Mala Shri Lal. Professor Mrinal Mri was to deliver inaugural address, but he couldn't make it and he couldn't join in. Hence, the words of the chair, the address of the chair will inaugurate the symposium. Then there will be a session titled Temsula, the Literary and Cultural Northeast, which will be chaired by Professor Munmun Muzamdar. And the speakers will be Professor Desmond Kharmaflang and Professor Mala Ranganathanji. And then there will be a valedictory address, which will be chaired by Professor Esther Siem. Professor Kailash Baral will not be there in person, but his valedictory address will be read out by Professor Preetinicha Barmanji, who is with us here. And Dr. Setolu Tuni will make concluding remarks. Temsula Ao was a distinguished Indian poet, fiction writer, and ethnographer. Born in 1945, she was professor of English at Northeast Hill University, Nehu, from where she retired in 2010. She served as the director of the Northeast Cultural Center between 1992 and 1997 on deputation from Nehu. A recipient of the Padma Shri, Sahitya Akademi Award, Governor's Gold Medal, and Kusumagraj National Literature Award for her immense contribution to Indian English literature. Her oeuvre includes Essay, When in Doubt, Laburnum for My Head, The Hills Called Home, Stories from a War Zone, Ao Naga Oral Tradition, a memoir, Once Upon a Life, Burnt Curry and Bloody Rugs, besides a book of literary criticism titled Henry James's Quest for an Ideal Heroine, and 7 poetic works. Her works have been translated into German, French, Ahomia, Bengali, and Hindi. She was widely respected as one of the major literary voices in English to emerge from the Northeast India, along with Mitra Fukan and Mamang Dai. Temsula Ao breathed her last on 9th October 2022. She was 76. Here we are today at the virtual symposium to commemorate her and several seminal dimensions of her works. I request at the outset Professor Jyotirmay Pradhani ji, who is a writer, critic, and translator. He writes in English, Ahomia, and Rajbanshi, and is professor of English at Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, and is a member of Sahitya Akademi's English Advisory Board, to make introductory remarks. Professor Jyotirmay Pradhani ji.
Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Krishna Bahuneji, respected chairperson of today's National Symposium on Temsula Ao and the Northeast of India. And before I introduce the theme of the synopsis, theme of this particular symposium, I must take this opportunity to express thanks to Sahitya Akademi on behalf of the Department of English, Nehu Shillong, for having jointly organized this program with us. The original plan was to host this program at our Shillong campus, from where Temsula Ao retired as the Professor of English and the Dean of Humanities. We're especially thankful to Professor Mala Shri Lal, convener of the English Advisory Board of Sahitya Akademi, for having readily approved the program on Temsula Ao, However, for several unforeseen developments, we had to postpone the program a number of times, and finally, on her advice and initiatives, we could organize the program online today. Thanks a lot, madam. We are deeply indebted to you for your extraordinary support to the department and to this event. I must also express my gratitude to Dr. Srinivas Rao, Secretary Sahitya Academy, who was always forthcoming to go out of his ways to extend all his support to our department. Last time, when I called him to inform him about the December date of this symposium, which was supposed to be in December last year, he was at the World Book Fair at Frankfurt, but he soon called me back and readily agreed to be in Shillong despite his other engagements during those days. When the event was turned into an online one, he was equally keen to organize the program and extended every support to us. Thank you, Dr. Rao, and I'm sure together we're going to organize another event soon where we're going to have you here in Shillong. I'm profusely thankful to Professor K.C. Baral, who was one of our key speakers today, and who took personal interest to have this program done and was in touch with Dr. Rao on these. He was also the one who had readily agreed to be in this program and even got his tickets booked despite some of his personal difficulties during the early occasions. Professor Baral has been a great source of inspiration for us always. Also, thanks to Professor Mrinal Miri and Professor Sujata Miri for having agreed to come to Shillong to take part in the program on Temsula, and who was one of the dear colleagues in the university, but unfortunately could not be here today following some sudden emergencies. And we are grateful to all the speakers and session chairs of today's program. Without your support, it would not have been possible at all. I must take the name of Professor Munmun Majumdar, who is the Dean of Humanities, who is among us today. I must take the name of Professor Esther CM, who is just retired from our department and one of the very intimate friends and colleagues of Dr. Temsula Ao, and also I must take the name of Professor Munmun Majumdar, Professor Manaranganathan, who is also here, who has agreed to be in this program at the last moment. Despite her very heavy schedule, who is supposed to leave today itself, she has agreed to be in this program today. I must take the name of Sri Parameshwaran of Sahitya Academy, who worked almost 24/7 to make the program happen. He was always there on phone to meticulously plan the program and was a source of confidence to me, as he was not at all perturbed by several twists and turns that occurred in its wake. He is a great crisis manager, and I must admit, and thanks a lot to Sri Parameshwaran, and also I'm deeply thankful to Sri Krishna Kim Bahune of Sahitya Academy for all the great help and immense cooperation to have this program organized today online. I must say thanks to all my colleagues and students who are always there on war footing to make this program a success in every respect. Dr. Pitinisha and Dr. Sedebu, the local coordinators, have worked hard to take care of all the minor details with utmost sincerity. I'm happy to inform all of you that students, scholars, and teachers of the department are all there watching the program live on big screen from their respective classrooms, where our students, Ang Tan Kroh and Wang Kibla, are the two smart technical experts to take care of the streaming devices. I'm sure they're all looking at the screen at the moment with their smiling faces. Since it's an online event being controlled from the Academy office, I must also say thanks to all of you sitting behind the screen in Daddy office to make it a success. Though we keenly wanted to make it an offline event, but we have realized that as an online program, we are with a lot of other participants who might not have been able to make it otherwise. More importantly, I believe it is a destiny that because it is an online program, we could have Professor Mala Shilal today with us. We in the department always consider lucky, as this department has been deeply associated with the legacy of Temsula. Many of our colleagues have been integral parts of the making of Temsula as writer. This particularly is the reason why she has been a great source of pride and inspiration for all of us. A teacher and a scholar, a successful academician in her own right, who got the Fulbright Fellowship to work on the indigenous literature of America, Temsula is the matriarch of Anglophone writing from the region, which came to be known as the Northeast literature. The story of Northeast literature cannot be complete without these hymns called home. Published in 2005, arguably one of the first most significant books of fiction that told the stories of Nagaland at the time when it was a hotbed of violence and suffering. She was also the first Anglophone author from the Northeast to have received the Sahitya Academy Award and also the third highest civilian award, the Padma Shri. Born on 25 October 1945, as a writer, Temsula Ao was the one to have been assertive not only about Northeast as a socio-political space, but also as a literary canon. She claimed the distinctive identity of this literature, which she described as different from the Indian writing in English, and she preferred to call it the new literature from the Northeast. She described the literature from Northeast as the writing about one's roots, about identity, not as an act of confrontation, but as an act of introspection. And while looking at the contemporary experiences of her people against the turbulence of violence, she created some of the most powerful metaphors in the form of characters and events in her stories. The last song of the young Naga girl, Apinio, poignantly reflects the deep wounds a community can suffer at the brutality of the armed forces of their own community, of their own country. At the personal level, I got to meet her when I joined the department as a research scholar way back in the late 90s. Later, when I joined the department as a teacher at Tura campus, she was the head of the department here at Shillong, and also she became the dean. Around that time, her first collection of short stories came out, These Hills, called Home. And a couple of years later, her second book of stories, Lebanon from a Hit, was published. It was 2009. I remember how she gave me a copy of her book, and I took about 10 copies from her for my colleagues and friends in Tura, which they still consider to be the best gift that I had got them from Shillong. At that time, we were running a journal from Tura protocol where Anjali Daimari of Guwahati University wrote a critical paper on Temsula's notion of home, which was one of the early critical essays on Temsula's stories. There, she perceptively said that for Temsula Ao, a home is a metaphor for loss and pain, and at the same time, a site of longing and hope. At the personal level, for Temsula Ao, there were times when she had no home. Home for her was not the physical shelter, but the emotional retreat of assurance. That was what eluded during her childhood. She reflected on Gore Vidal while she wrote her memoir, Once Upon a Life. About her memoir, she writes, the principle adhered to the effort to present the authenticity and intensity of the impression retained in her memory of her heart. Every story begins with the phrase, once upon a time. There was a king or a queen or a prince, but for Temsula Ao, it was once upon a time there was a life. Having lost her parents at an early age and growing up in Joharhat with siblings, schooling at Golaghat of Assam, graduation from Mokokchung, an MA in literature from Guwahati University, and then becoming a professor of English at Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, retiring as a Dean of Humanities of Nehu and receiving the Sahitya Academy and Padma Shri in between, she has had a stellar journey for herself. Her life itself is a captivating tale. The story becomes unique when the sufferer survives to find a better future and lives to tell the story. That's what she writes. For her, telling the story is a means to heal the old wounds. It was a reward for her to live through the painful recollections. For her, telling the story of her life was an ethical imperative. The story of her hardship, defeats and triumphs against insurmountable odds, as she writes, through sheer grit and self-belief to overcome those vicissitudes of life. And that is the reason why Temsula Ao always a person, not only as a great writer, but as a person self is always an inspiration for all of us. In her story, lest we forget, she said that in her stories, she endeavored to revisit the lives of those people whose pain has so far gone unmentioned and unacknowledged. But those were not historical facts, though. As she described, many of her stories emerged from the turbulent years of bloodshed and tears, which form the history of a people, that is, the people of Nagaland. According to her, the inheritor of such a history has a tremendous responsibility to sift through the collective experience and make a sense of the impact left by the struggle on their lives. One of the striking themes of her stories is the loss of home, at home itself. Perhaps she is one of the highest translated Anglophone authors from the Northeast. In Assam, Julie Datta, an Academy Award-winning translator from Tejpur University, translated her Lebanon for my head into Assamese as Hiror Babe Ajupa Khalothia Hunaru. Shantanu Gangopadhyay, a playwright, actor, and translator, who was also the part of Sahitya Academy, translated these hills called home and also Lebanon for my head as Amoltash Ebo Onnanno Golpo. Just to resonate with the title of her life story, we can say about this fascinating storyteller, intense poet, and inspiring person. She herself is part of the lore. Once upon a time, there was Temsula. With these words, I thank once again to Sahitya Academy for having given this opportunity to organize this particular event in honor of this legendary writer from the Northeast. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Pradhani, for this introductory remark. I now invite the chair to speak, Professor Mala Lal, who was Professor of English, University of Delhi, and has 16 books to her credit, including In Search of Sita, Tagore and the Feminine, Finding Radha, and the prize-winning fiction co-authored with Namita Gokhaleji, Betrayed by Hope, a play on the life of Michael Madhusudan Dutt. Professor Mala Lal's specialization is in literature, women, and gender studies. Her poems and stories have been published in Indian Literature, Confluence, The Beacon, the Poetry Society of India, and online portals and anthologies. She has translated poems and stories from Bengali and Hindi into English. She was senior consultant to the Ministry of Culture and is a member of International Book Award juries. Currently, she convenes Sahitya Akademi's English Advisory Board. I invite Professor Mala Lal.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's a great honor and a privilege for me to be chairing the inaugural session of this seminar that the Sahitya Academy has dedicated in honor of Professor Temsula Au. Temsula was not only a very great writer, and she wrote in many, many genres, but she was also, for me, a fellow member on Sahitya Academy boards quite often, and she became a good friend. There are any number of conversations I had with her while we were participating in seminars across the country. And she really was my gateway to the Northeast because it was through those conversations and reading her books that I understood in those days, and I'm talking of about 15, 16 years ago, when not much was known about the Northeast, that some of us had the privilege of meeting and talking to Temsula Au and to Mamang Dai and to some of you here, including Munmun Majumdar, where we learned about the Northeast and were able to get the few books that were available in English translation. And Temsula was a person of very quiet dignity. And I'm sure you, who are her colleagues, would know this better than me. But all of us who have read her know her to be a very powerful and a very sensitive writer. So, my entry to the Northeast through Temsula Au is what I'm going to focus on in the next few minutes. I refer first to Temsula Au's collection from Nagaland, which is called These Hills Called Home, something that Jyotirmoy Pradhani also referred to. Understandably so, because the subtitle of this book is Stories from a War Zone. This is 2006 when the book was published. And I'm going to repeat a quote that Jyotirmoy also used because it's such an important and significant statement when Temsula Au says that she has endeavored to revisit the lives of those people whose pain, has so far gone unmentioned and unacknowledged. Now, today, when there is so much literature about the Northeast that has been generated, and one is happy for that, that proliferation of translated material, of seminars focus on the Northeast, we are very fortunate that this has happened. But think of the time when this book was published, 2006, and indeed people were not so aware of the pain and suffering and the sociological conditions within which these stories were composed. Now, from this corpus, I'm going to refer to only one story as a kind of an example of Temsula's sensitivity to the pain and suffering of the underprivileged person, particularly the underprivileged woman. This story is called The Pot Maker, and it's a story of a young girl. Her name is Centilla, and she wants to learn pottery. Her mother is a reasonably well known potter, but the mother forbids the daughter and refuses to teach her pottery, saying that this is a lowly kind of occupation. You should learn weaving because weaving has better value in the market, better acceptance in society, and therefore you must learn how to weave. Also, in the patriarchal tradition, the father tells the daughter that it's also good value when we look at a bridegroom for you, that if you know how to do some weaving, then you have a better standing in the marriage market. So I think by sketching this kind of a background, Temsula Au has given us the microcosm of the social system, cultures, beliefs, and values within which such a story functions. Now, what happens one morning then is that the child, on the other hand, becomes absolutely adamant and begins to travel away from home to learn pottery from another potter. She refuses to learn weaving. And then, when she comes back one day, she finds that her mother has been killed. And the body of the mother has just been flung in a very undignified and a terrible manner, with the lungi falling apart. And the young child, Santila, is utterly confused by what has happened. But the book is written for adult readers like you and me. And particularly when I come from an area which does not belong to the Northeast, it comes as a shocking realization of violence, and particularly the kind of violence that can be done to a female protagonist, a female body. And it is something that haunts the reader when one comes to those last few paragraphs of the story called The Pot Maker that Temsula Au has included in this book called These Hills Come Home. Now, it's significant, I believe, that through a story like this, and there are many others, the Temsula Au made it possible for us who are not Northeasterners to step into a coded world. It's coded by not telling us about data and analysis, but it is coded by looking into a common local practice, that of a potter's wheel, and it's done to the rhythm of songs, and therefore it turns our attention to oral literature. She also reminds us through this story about the competing hierarchies among the arts, that pottery is lower than weaving, and also the jealousies among the women. Moreover, the custom of communal dormitories, the young women and men, and what their belief systems are. So, all these cultural details are subtly and beautifully embedded in stories that were written by Temsula Au. Um, I recall another aspect of Nagaland in conversations that I had with Temsula. And this was about the Naga Mothers Association, the NMA. Uh, I do voluntary work for women. It's my very humble service in a cause. But I was kind of puzzled about what the Naga Mothers Association is about. And I learned in my conversations with Temsula and with others from Nagaland that it is an umbrella organization that brings together the women from different ethnic groups in that area. And because of the collective power, and collective power is something that Krishna ji also mentioned in his introductory remarks, that when there is a collective entity, then the possibility of fighting back against majoritarian values or patriarchal values becomes that much easier, because an individual is not as well equipped as a collective might be. And we do know from the history of the Naga Mothers Association, I started following what they were doing, came upon many examples of where, although they themselves were vulnerable to attack, both physical and also other forms of violation, they continued to work hard towards bringing dignity to the young lives that had been traumatized by war. So I would then surmise this part of my talk on Temsula Au and her significance, that it was not only violence against the woman that was important. There was at that time, I was told, there was a great deal of drug abuse, alcoholism, substance abuse that was also going on. And this happens often in war zones because the regularity of life is so disturbed. And Temsula Au herself was also, as a writer, affected by what was happening. And there were consciousness and awareness that she had towards the suffering and pain of the many communities that were hurt by the conditions of war. Now, such writing from the Northeast brings me to the second point that I want to make, and that is about the importance of interpreting memory while conducting research. And today, memory studies has become a very, very significant area of research. And I do believe it's time to go back to Temsula Au with this perspective of the very contemporary tools that we have from memory studies. Temsula herself was aware that the oral resources that the Northeast is full of go through a series of memory recycling. Somebody tells a story, it's told in another way by yet another person. That again gets repeated in a separate form, and somewhere it gets written, but then there are many, many versions. So the sensitivity that Temsula had to literary methodologies, critical vocabulary, and she was a professor. She was a fine writer. She was also a professor in the classroom. And therefore, the subjectivity of writing is something that she was deeply aware of, and we had many conversations. But what I'll do right now is simply quote a formulation from Temsula Au, which raises a significant question about research into oral sources that the Northeast is full of. And I'm quoting Temsula Au. Memory is a tricky thing. It picks and chooses what to preserve and what to discard. But what do you do when it comes to someone else's memory? And when that memory is of pain and pain alone, do you brush it aside and say, doesn't concern me? And if you do that, are you the same person that you were before you learned of the pain of a fellow human being? I think not. This is where the quotation ends. And these are lines that I have quoted from Au's essay, Lest We Forget. What are we then learning from Temsula Au's formulations on memory? We are learning that the tricks of memory create an alternative narrative to the mainstream narratives that we have inherited. And therefore, there is a very good reason for writing rewriting, revisiting, retelling the stories that have traditionally come to us, whether these are stories that belong to so-called history or folklore or legends or mythology, or stories that relate to real life episodes. A footnote, because I must do this, is about female memory, about which Temsula was also extremely sensitive. And it has been found through archival and research sources that women keep memory differently from men. I know that scientists might want to debate that, and surely it's a debatable point, but I can quote source after source, and here I'm only going to mention one particular study that was done in Europe, which shows that women's narratives are more likely to yield, and I'm quoting, understatements, avoidance of first person point of view, and rare mention of personal accomplishments. What, therefore, are we learning from this? That Temsula Au took it upon herself to give portraits of the Northeast, particularly of Nagaland. She was entirely aware as an academic critic that there are variables that play around a story. And she, as a writer, a critic, as an academic, and I know as a friend and a thinking intellectual person, encouraged the interpretation and reinterpretation of these stories that come from the cultural memory of her people. I move from that to my concluding remarks, and these will be a little on the longer and a more general side, because I want to now focus on the second part of this symposium theme, and that is the Northeast, the impact on the Northeast. I therefore want to conclude these remarks on a note of joy and optimism. We have so far been talking about war zones, pain, suffering, and illustrations of that from Au's writing. I'm now going to turn to the broader Northeast, and I want to talk about the joy and the optimism that also exists in the Northeast that has come to us who are from other areas, because there is a wonderful oral repertoire of folk tales from the Himalayas. The last year, Namita Gokhale and I, we do a lot of research and publishing together. We've just at the Jaipur Literature Festival released a book which is called The Whispering Mountains, Marvelous Folk Tales from the Himalayas. Many of these are from small and endangered languages collected and translated for the first time. There are members in among the speakers here. I don't want to necessarily name names because I have gone through many stages of conversation with them. There are languages in the Northeast that are disappearing. There are communities that are reducing in size. It is very, very significant that when we talk about Au's influence, as Krishna ji said, she was among the first. Jyoti also brought up this idea that she was among the earliest of her writers. Let us follow the directions in which she put us, and that was to look for the unwritten, to look for the unsaid, to state that which has not been stated. And in doing this research on the Himalayas, the Northeast sections came out to have very rich array of subjects, of which I will take only one. And this is the eco-friendly tales from the Northeast. We come across legends of trees and flowers and how they respond to human behavior. And it strikes me as particularly significant that whether we look at Tripura or we look at Meghalaya, we look at Arunachal Pradesh, there isn't that barrier between the human and the non-human when we look at Northeast literature. Why this is so, I do not know. But I'm glad it is not, the barrier does not exist, because the world that we are now confronting, the climate change, the problems between human beings and natural calamity, we are facing the problems of having created those barriers. So, for instance, we came across a very beautiful tale from Tripura about something called a Keringar flower. Maybe if there's somebody in the audience who can explain it a little more. It's a very beautiful and a very seductive flower, but you're not supposed to use it as decoration in your hair. The story is about a young couple where the young bride says, "Please get me this flower," and the husband says, "No, you should not be taking it down. I can't pluck it for you because it'll bring bad luck." And she says, "No, no, but I want it." And like the indulgent new husband, he just plucks the flower and she immediately puts it in her head. The moment she puts the flower in her head, the husband then begins to change his form and he becomes a monkey. And this is the kind of storytelling which makes us aware of the link between human beings and nature, which is inseparable. So, the stories, the folk tales, particularly that we have come across in our research in the Northeast, that the folklore is about shapeshifters, about how rainbows came to be. It's such a beautiful concept. How did rainbows happen? And there's a story about it from the Northeast. There's stories about mother birds, talking birds, and a mother bird who protects her three little babes from a predatory cat. There's stories about an enormous frog who is able to outwit a very powerful tiger. Now, these stories are, one might say, of a magical world, but as a writer and a critic, I would suggest that this magical world is symbolic of the strife, the struggle, the pain, the suffering, the competitiveness, the misunderstanding of the environment that we are all a part of in our modern times. So I conclude finally by saying that Northeast literature has new dimensions to offer Indian writing. And Temsula Au is among our senior writers. And in the early years, translation was not much available, but by now, a fair amount is accessible through translation. But for me, it's been a new worldview that has been opened up originally by Temsula Au. And the subjects today that we get are all the way from social justice to magic, from women's issues to humanitarian values. And today, I pay my deep respects to Professor Temsula Au for putting us in these new directions, for being a friend and a teacher to many of you here, a friend to me, a fellow scholar to me, a very great writer whose works I keep going back to, but with each rereading and with a modern sense, I discover something fresh, something stimulating, and something intellectually vibrant. Thank you, Temsula. We remember you today with great regard and deep respect. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, ma'am, for that profound and beautiful address. You focused many things, such as Northeastern literature as well as languages there, and some of them are dying, which is quite serious. Thanks a lot for that address. Your address, in fact, inaugurated the symposium in absence of Professor Mrinal Miri. Thank you. I thank Jyotirmay Pradhani ji also. The inaugural session ends here. Now we will have immediately the first session, which I earlier said that Professor Munmun Majumdar ji will chair, and the speakers are Professor Desmond Kharmaflang and Professor Mala Ranganathan ji. Sujata Miri ji was also to be there, but she couldn't make it. So I invite Professor Munmun Majumdar ji to chair this session. I formally introduce the participants as well as the chair, and then hand it over to the chair. Professor Munmun Majumdar has a teaching career spanning over 40 years. A professor of English, she also holds the office of the Dean of the School of Humanities, NEHU. After her PhD, she had a short stint as a research fellow at the University of Manchester. She has published numerous research papers in the field of English studies and cognate subjects. The first speaker in the session, Professor Desmond Kharmaflang, is a poet and folklorist. He teaches folkloristics at the Northeastern Hill University, Shillong. And the second speaker, Professor Mala Ranganathanji, is Professor of English, Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, Fulbright Fellow and Asia Fellow awardee with 2 authored books, Understanding Maria Amy Fornes's Theatre and Violence and Terror, Narratives from Northeast India. Besides 2 co-edited volumes, The Politics and Reception of Rabindranath Tagore's Drama, The Bard on the Stage, and The Politics and Reception of Rabindranath Tagore's Drama, The Bard on the Stage. She has completed a UGC-sponsored major research project on terror narratives in South Asian literature, based on which her book on gendered terror narratives from South Asia is commissioned by Cambridge Scholars Publishing, London, to be published this year. I invite the speakers as well as the chair and hand the charge over to the chair, Professor Manmohan Majumdarji. I request you, ma'am, to please open the session.
Yes. Thank you. The first session, the inaugural session, was wonderfully organized. Thank you for all the remarks made. Jyotirmoy Pradhani has been working very hard behind the scenes to make a success of this, along with our junior colleagues, Dr. Preeti Barman and Settimo. Welcome to Professor Mala Ranganathan, who will be part of the session, and to Professor Desmond Khamaflan, who is a very well-known folklorist, and he will also be giving his views. I particularly, want to put on record my deep appreciation for the words and the very, very erudite manner in which Professor Madhusri Lal has, spoken on Professor Temsula. Now, I have been fortunate enough to have had association with Professor R, whom I revere, and whose wonderful contribution to the department as well as the university I would like to place on record. Now, one thing that has always, impacted many of us as far as Professor R is concerned is the generosity of spirit that she was capable of exhibiting, and the manner in which she gathered the young, the defenseless, the people who are not quite so comfortable with the situation.
Camera on me.
Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yeah. You are.
Yes,
Continue, ma'am.
She took the younger colleagues as well as the students under her wing, and always had a word of encouragement, for everybody. The other thing that I would like to put on record is that when I first saw Professor Ao as a teacher after I joined NEHU in early 80s, was the fact that, she carried herself as a young Naga woman. She wore her, Naga clothes, which is the mekhela or the lungi as it was called, and looked so, so wonderfully, young and sprightly. As Professor Ao matured, I could see that even her attire underwent significant changes. She became more cosmopolitan. She chose all the pastel shades. And as she walked through the department, she inspired the awe of all of us. We looked forward to our exchanges with her. When I became the head of the department, Professor Ao was the dean, and there were occasions when I had to seek her counsel. I understand that she had a rare, uncompromising attitude towards everybody who wouldn't work as hard as her, and she was very principled. She was somebody who believed in hard work, and she always used to tell us that she was a morning person. Most of her writings were done in the morning, as she would tell us. And today, when we celebrate her achievements, we must also understand the manner in which she carved a niche for herself in the literary firmament of the Anglophone literature of the country, and how much she believed in the young writers who were emerging, not just from this part of the world, but also from the northeast part of India, but also from other parts of India. There was something that in her that enabled her to connect with all those aspiring writers who wanted to put their stories across. Her own life is a life full of lyricism, I would say, because there was beauty in everything that she did, and a kind of honesty in her uncompromising attitude, as I have already spoken about. She was traditional yet modern, and it was Shillong that she loved very much and made her home for very many years. And she was associated with the growth and progress of the department and the university through all its golden years. Today, we miss Professor Mrinal Miri and Professor Sujata Miri, who I know were people who were closely associated with Professor Ao. And however, we do know that Professor Ao is deeply revered in the country as well as among the writers from Northeast India, because in her work we find a celebration of life. In her work we find a celebration of heart and uncompromising attitude towards labor, towards the small doings that make up life. Life is not full of a very magnificent kind of opportunities offered to us. Most of us live in the mundane details, and Professor Ao's stories bring that out so well as her characters struggle through life and make a mark for themselves in different fields. So her own life was a life of struggle, as we all know, and how she rose like a star to shine and to offer us hope for a better world, for a better future, not just for the northeast of India, but all people located in different parts of the world who face adversity or who somehow find the voices stifled. Thank you, Professor Ao. We have been planning to have this in your memory for a very long time. Thank you for guiding us, and we will cherish our time spent, the years that we spent with you. And it's with a deep sense of gratitude that we open up this session. Professor Desmond Karmoflang will be the first speaker. And may I also make my excuses? I have a meeting coming up, and I will hand over the responsibility of conducting the rest of the session to Professor Jyotirmoy Pradhan. Thank you. Professor Desmond Karmoflang. Ma'am, since Professor Mala Ranganathan is here, shall we listen to her?
Yeah, I'm very much here. I'm here.
Yeah. So can I invite Professor Mala Ranganathan then to start? Because I don't see Desmond here yet. Professor Mala Ranganathan?
Yes, Professor Munmun. Yeah, I'm there. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for this golden opportunity to be part of the symposium, particularly on our beloved, esteemed colleague, late Mrs. Temsula Ao, who we all know as a poet, novelist, short story writer, ethnographer, university professor, and Padma Shri. I personally remember her colleague, in a situation where when we joined the department, how welcome we felt. How accommodative she was as a colleague, and particularly, can you hear me? I hope am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Particularly, how accommodative she was as a colleague, how cooperative she was as a colleague. Helps in whatever program we had proposed to do. So I think whenever I think of Temsula, only a sense of warmth, a sense of camaraderie, and her jokes. I mean, I don't want to share some of the jokes she used to crack with us, and that really brings out. Here, I would only like to say that all that brings out her sense of humor. In I think this was even though I have not read fully this book, this is a 1999 publication. I just, when I was preparing for this talk, I just happened to see her quoting in her preface a line from A.K. Ramanujam's Folk Tales from India. I quote, cultural forms, within brackets she writes, such as tales, cultural forms make people what they are as much as people make culture. Cultural forms make people what they are as much as people make culture. And I think this is very, very relevant here, valid here in this, situation, particularly in this session, which focuses on the cultural aspect also. And I think Temsula, from whatever I have read, from my project, I focused more on her short fiction and also on her fiction more than poetry. I would only just focus very briefly on her fiction and short fiction. So I focused on, a few texts which I will discuss here. Her writing, as far as whatever I have read, I feel that her writing in general, I think, characterizes a pleasant narrative style that renders the life, culture, and images of the Northeast, particularly Nagaland, with an authentic honesty and simplicity, thereby bringing out a woman's sensitive and sensible approach to life. So this is what I understand from her fictional texts. Temsula Au's collection of short stories. This is a 2005 collection called These Hills Called Home. In this, I think the short story collection is set in the turbulent times of Nagaland, and it portrays the grim reality of a war-torn state, where human life is at most times a suitable and acceptable sacrifice for the greater good of the humanity. So, so you can see, particularly in this collection, representation of violence, which again I studied, as part of an article. So this violence, including gendered violence, terror, and the ever-looming sense of threat, they are the backbone of the stories, as these stories narrate Nagas trying to negotiate between issues of home, identity, nation state, tradition and modernity, armed forces and militancy, with the ordinary man, particularly, her focus is on the ordinary man or ordinary woman, who is caught in a, in a kind of a crossroad or a kind of a crossfire of all these situations. And these stories, I think they make the reader question the accommodating claims of the Indian nation state and I feel sad, but the distant possibility of real peace. So the distant possibility of real peace, that is, I think, a major focus on. And another collection, which is called, it's a 2009 short story collection called Laburnum for My Head. I think this, I particularly enjoyed reading some of the short stories like Laburnum for My Head, particularly where she describes laburnum, a flower, and the cultural aspect of how that is, used in the, funeral ceremony, and her love for the flowers. And, she feels very sad that such beautiful flowers, but, considered only as a funeral flower. That's what I vaguely remember. So it brings alive, this collection brings alive the everyday life of the people of Nagaland. So the stories that I mentioned here, Laburnum for My Head, then there's a story called Flight, and The Boy Who Sold an Airfield. So all these stories portray very simple everyday life that, however, acts only as a facade. I mean, all these, even though she's talking about the simplicity of life, she's portraying that simplicity of everyday life, but that's only a facade. Why it's a facade? Because the stories depict a far more complex metaphor of reality. So the emotions evoked by these stories, these are my impressions. There's a kind of a universal appeal on the simple folk life which Ao has portrayed. And terror and violence and their aftermath. So these are the focus of some stories of this collection, like The Letter, A Simple Question, and there's a story called Sony. Sony, particularly, I think, I was very interested in reading this story on Sony about an insurgent leader and the suffering that is faced by by his girlfriend. And in particular, there is this story called A Simple Question, The Last Song, and of course, Sony. They really highlight the menacing connection between gender and violence. I think gender is a very important aspect of her works, which I think needs more attention. These stories again portray how ordinary people, especially women, are the ones that are the most affected by the ensuing violence between the militants, the paramilitary, and the state. And they also, they put to question even more complex issues for the Indian nation state in relation to Northeast India. A story like The Last Song, I think it brings out the gendered view on the rape of a mother and daughter in a church, mind you, in a church by the rebels. So the last song brings out the gendered view on the rape of a mother and a daughter in a church by the rebels. I think so. That's how brings out the view. I mean, brings out viewing the gendered body as a space for literary articulation. So, other than this, there's a very interesting novel called Ozenla's Story, which is a 2018 publication. And again, this follows the life of a Naga woman, Ozenla. I hope I'm pronouncing it properly. In her search for, and Ozenla is in search for identity within a dominant patriarchal society. And all these social restrictions, particularly in the Naga society, particularly the social restrictions which marred the woman's self within the Naga society because of the traditions and customs. So all these are brought out through Ozenla's marriage. So within the sanctified space of her marriage, how Ozenla experiences the sacrilegious acts of domestic violence, marital rape, and also infidelity, disloyalty, all of which she bears with patience and in silence. But the effects of such kind of psychological violence are clear in, the protagonist's psychological makeup, and the threat of this kind of violence being repeated is the unwanted birth of her two daughters. So this unwanted birth of her two daughters. Why unwanted? Unwanted not by house-in-law, but from the point of view of her husband and in-laws. So, however, house-in-law gradually evolves into a. The novel is about house-in-law's gradual evolution into a stronger individual. An individual who wants to have a say in her family, in her own family, and in decision-making process. So you can see that our depicts here the voice of the voiceless, and also the oppressive gender norms and expectations within the Naga society. How these oppressive gender norms and expectations within the Naga society fall. And see, I think that whatever stories, whether it is fiction or short fiction, I find that our stories are not about the history of Nagaland, but I think it's about conflicts. Conflicts where there are, I quote Ao here from her short story, Lest We Forget. This is a short story from her collection called These Hills Called Home. So in this, she says, it's not about history of England, but about conflicts. What kind of a conflicts? Conflicts where there are, I quote, no winners, only victims. And the result of which, I quote again, can be measured only in human terms. So I think this is about her fiction, but of course there's one more, which I just read, even though I had purchased the book, I think when Professor Ao had come here in another Sahitya Academy program, I think 5 or 6 years back, and probably I must have bought it there. Her memoir called Once Upon a Life, published in 2013, it very much brings out, her transit. It was very interesting to read, her life, and it brings out her transit from the poor, oppressive living conditions to a liberated, educated woman. I feel all the more proud of her when I read this particular memoir. Because the memoir sets a model. It sets an inspiration to women living in patriarchal environment on never to give up the fighting spirit and to live one's life with dignity. I'm so glad that Sahitya Academy had given me this opportunity, even though in a very short notice I had to prepare all this. But even then, I'm so glad to have accepted this assignment, and because it gave me an opportunity to read her memoir, and I think some serious research would come out, I think, of this. So thank you so much for this golden opportunity to be part of this August gathering. And I hope I have made my point. Thank you so much. I think, sir, you have muted yourself. We can't hear you.
Bhavanaji, your mic is muted, it seems.
I hope what I said was audible, Professor Pradhani.
Yeah, you are absolutely audible.
You are saying.
Bhavanaji, Krishnaji, your mic is muted.
Now, am I
Yeah,
audible?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mala Ranganathanji, for your brilliant paper. How beautifully you pointed out and discussed that how Temsula Ao's fiction represented voice of the voiceless. Thanks a lot. May I now invite Professor Desmond Kharma-Flong to speak.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Thank you, the chair for this particular session, Professor Moon, my fellow panelists, and the Sahitya Academy for having organized this program. I'm afraid I'll not be able to stay till the end because I have one of my students will be doing his pre-submission seminar, so I would have to leave after I'm done. Uh, so let me begin by sharing, some of the memories that I have of Professor Temsula Au, who was my teacher, and later on we became colleagues and friends. In 1985, the first semester batch of the English department comprised of eight students, three from Assam, two from Nagaland, two from Meghalaya, one from Bihar, and one from Manipur. I was one of this diverse group, and we had, on the first day of class, we had our first encounter with Professor Au when she met us for an introductory lecture on linguistics. I forget what aspect of language studies she shared with us that particular day, but she struck us, the students, as knowledgeable, warm, and friendly. Subsequently, we were introduced to American literature, in which she excelled, and also literary criticism. As was the practice, we were welcomed into the English department fraternity by our seniors in a fresher social, which was organized, I remember very clearly, at Bijni complex of Northeastern Hill University. Bijni complex is located at Lajumkra. Professor Au was the warden of the girls' hostel, and the girls' hostel was also located at Bijni complex. And because of her presence in the Fresher Social, the party was given special permission to go on till 9 or 10 p.m. I distinctly remember. During the Fresher Social, Professor Au saw that I was familiar with the guitar, and she invited me, to accompany her to sing a rendition of the celebrated folk song, which actually is based on a children's rhyme entitled There's a Hole in My Bucket. It's a famous song which has been further popularized, by several singers. This classic song characterizes in a very dramatic way and in a very protracted dialogue between two characters that is humorous, that is ironic, and it talks about the vagaries of life. If this program had been an offline event, I would have gladly, played the guitar and sung this song, because it's a tremendously moving song that talks about life and how life is a series of negotiations that as human beings we have to go through. Reading Professor Au's memoirs, Once Upon a Life, in 2014, I think she presented me a copy of Once Upon a Life uh, in 2014, after she came, I think, for the last time to attend a conference that I had organized at Nehu. After the conference, she handed me a copy of this book, and she inscribed on it with with the greatest affection. I could not help but admire the resilience and the alacrity with which she took on the vagaries of life, as recorded in her book, and the resonance that her memoirs have with this iconic song, There's a Hole in My Bucket, is indeed very, very striking. No wonder she was so fond of the song, which she kept on singing during fresher socials and the occasional departmental picnics. The picnics were also a regular feature of the English department at that point of time, and we used to frequent the shores of the Omyam Lake, where where we would cook meals and we would enjoy doing sing songs. Uh, Her love for folklore kept us very close, and we attended many conferences together. Uh, when she left to take up that stint at the NEZCC, she also got me on the advisory committee, and it was during her tenure that countless productive programs were organized and publications were encouraged, especially on themes that were devoted to the intersections of folklore and literature. So we shared that love for literature. Oh, we shared that love for literature and folklore, and there is one thing which I would especially like to mention at this point. We had an abiding interest in shape shifting, something that she wrote about quite extensively, because the belief and practice of shape shifting is very much there among the Khasis as well as the Ao Nagas. It is something that we shared, and we used to have very lengthy discussions on this particular phenomenon. And I would just like to, you know, share some of the ideas that emanated from many of the discussions that we had on shape shifting. In fact, Professor Au devoted an entire volume, songs from the other life, where she talks about Ao Naga shape shifting belief and practice. And this, authority that she had on the belief and practice of shape shifting among the Ao Nagas is drawn, on her detailed ethnographic fieldwork among the Ao Nagas. Um, she, I mean, I'm particularly struck by one work which is in this volume. It's this poem which is called "In a Tiger Woman's Prayer." In a Tiger Woman's Prayer, where she takes inspiration from our Naga were tiger beliefs, and in a first person voice, she speaks in ritual declamation of the shifts in form and the gait in a body that contains human and were tiger souls. I quote from this poem: O you powers of the earth and sky, who gave me this destiny, tell me what is happening, because I hear a new cadence in the familiar steps that always stalk. The ensuing lines question what impulses and stimuli are causing the transformation that is embodied by shifts in gait as the female speaker proceeds towards the other world of the spirits, which is described as, and I quote, a shore beyond the region of the setting sun. I mean, this is a remarkable evocation, of the spirit world that she tries to portray and depict in this work. Uh, in addition to that, appealing to, I quote, the powers above She pleads that she rid herself of the other spirits within her. Again, quoting from this work, straddling my troubled spirit since grandfather's tiger soul came unbidden to take control and entangled my woman self in an unseemingly mesh of spirit, human, and beast. I mean, here there is this fantastic conflation of body, of soul, of spirit, something which also is being shared, which is also found among Khasis in our belief in the existence of a continuum of spirit, soul, and body. Um, there's also another fascinating work which I would like to quote, you, which is entitled "The Other World," and this is based on a Sangtam Naga myth. So we this clearly shows that Professor Ao was not only familiar with Ao Naga folklore, but she was also vastly interested in the folklore of the other Naga tribes and communities. So here, the other world is based on a Sangtam Naga myth about a young woman who is transformed into a fish during a bungled courtship with the Fish King and therefore was cast into the waters by her angry mother, leaving behind her terrestrial existence. With first person immediacy, these lines convey a sense of loss, of disorientation in an unfamiliar body traversing the water realm, which echoes and resonates with the other poems on human and non human shape shifting and transformational persons. And I quote again from this work: all around me is opaque and cold, and though he is always with me, I am truly alone and in total disjunct from my natural habitat, obsessed and soul concerned with protective possessiveness. The old king can never guess how much I miss my misplaced world where birds chirp and make nests, animals prowl and prey, trees and flowers grow and blossom, and humans live, love, and die. So, uh, this work reveals and demonstrates how intensely interested she was, in shape shifting phenomena. It's not only with the tiger spirit, but here we see in the Sangtam tale how there is also this belief that humans can can transform into other animal forms such as fish. Now, this abiding interest that both of us have in shape shifting, has sometimes in the presence of other people when we discuss these things, people thought that people thought that we were obsessed with the occult, or maybe even with the macabre, but these are things that Professor Temsula Au experienced herself, in collecting narratives from the Ao Naga community, and these are the narratives that she wanted to explain through prose and poetry. Um, she um, she made a tremendous contribution actually to the Indian Folklore Congress, of which we were a part. We had gone also to Amritsar to participate in one of the biggest conferences of the Indian Folklore Congress, which took place at Amritsar, and 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 the contributions that we made there have also been published in the Indian Folklore Journal. So, um, on the day that Professor Ao superannuated, it was very unfortunate that that I was traveling at that point of time. And when I met her a couple of days afterwards, after I had returned from my journey, after I had returned from my trip, sh I found her in the department, and she said, "Desmond, you missed yesterday's program, that the department had organized, on account of my superannuation, and therefore you owe me a song. Okay, you owe me a song." And therefore, I think it was a couple of years back, after she passed away, that there was an initiative taken by her students and colleagues to organize a tribute, and I also joined that tribute with a song, and that song was, "Where Have All the Flowers Gone?" Where have all the flowers gone? So whenever I think about Professor Ao, that song resonates, with so much of emotion, because whenever we met, especially after she had superannuated and she had joined the Women's Commission, so we used to meet in Sahitya Academy meetings and so on. She was very, very generous with her hugs, She was very generous with her hugs. She was hugging all the time and asking after my family and so on. So she was that gentle person that all of us, we miss so much. And she will be uh, an indelible memory, in most of us, people who have known her for a long time, and especially people like many of us who have grown under her tutelage. So, with these words, I thank the Sahitya Academy once again for providing me with this opportunity to share these thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Desmondji. So fondly remembering Temsula, as it were, you played a guitar. Thanks a lot. We will now have a valedictory session, as Professor Sujata Miri is not there. So we move on to valedictory session. Professor Esther Siem is with us to chair the valedictory session. I will first introduce Professor Esther Siem. Professor Esther Siem taught English literature at the Northeastern Hill University, Shillong. She has been involved in the study of Khasi folk literature for more than a decade now. Esther Siem is a bilingual writer. Her publications include 3 volumes of poetry, oral scriptings of wit and wisdom, of follies and frailties, many sides of many stories, and a play in Khasi entitled Ka Naam. She has a volume of critical work and has co-edited anthologies for the undergraduate courses under NAME. She is a member of the National Editorial Collective of the PLSI and has co-edited the volume entitled The Languages of Meghalaya, Volume 19, Part 1, which is in Khasi, and edited Languages of Meghalaya, Volume 19, Part 2 in English. Tulika has published her retelling in Khasi and in the English translation of a Khasi folktale. She has also translated a folktale from Arunachal Pradesh, published by Tulika, and has a book of short fiction, Memoir in Water Speaks, of Wa Umkhara. Hope I pronounced it correctly. In fact, Professor K.C. Baralji, eminent scholar, was to deliver valedictory address, but he could not be there with us in person. So we will request Dr. Preeti Nicha Barmanji to read out the valedictory address. First, I introduce Professor Baral, formerly the Vice Chairman of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad Institute of Asian Studies, Kolkata, under the Ministry of Culture, Government of India, was a former professor of English and India Studies at the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, where he also held the position of the Pro-Vice Chancellor. He also served Northeastern Hill University from 1979 till 1999. From 1999 till 2016, he was the director of the Shillong campus of EFL University. He has 12 books authored and edited to his credit. His latest work, Empire's Backyard, Colonial Modernity and Northeast India, is under publication by Routledge. He has more than 50 international and national publications in journals and about 30 book chapters. He is a recipient of Narendra Pradhan Award, British Council in ICHR Senior Academic Fellowships. His research interests include critical theory, India studies, and Northeast studies. And the Dr. Pritinitya ji is an assistant professor at the Department of English, Northeastern Hill University, Shillong. Dr. Setolu Tunil, who is going to make concluding remarks, is an assistant professor at the Department of English of Northeastern Hill University, Shillong. I hand over the charge of the valedictory session to the chair now, Professor Easter CM.
Thank you. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, ma'am, you're audible.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank each and every single one of you for having been part of this wonderful symposium. I would like to thank Professor Malashri Lal, whose introductory words have really brought light to a lot of aspects of Professor Temsula Au's work that we have never really been thinking about or have thought about, because so busy are we living the life. I would like to thank you for that. I would like to thank Professor Desmond, Professor Mala, and all the others for taking part and remembering Professor Temsula Au. Now, as chairperson, I know that I have to facilitate speakers, but I would like to take advantage of this moment, if you would allow me, to read a few of my memories of Professor Temsula Au. And then I would like to read out her poem, October, which talks about her death. And then I will hand it to, and then we will have the valedictory address. I hope that's all right. Okay. So I begin by quoting a speech that she made at the Jaipur Lit Fest in 2011, when she talks about language and says that the language of literature transcends its defining point of origin and becomes a universal password that admits all humanity into its fold of understanding, thus proving that this inclusiveness in the language of literature is what alleviates the drabness of ordinary human existence and makes it livable. Therein lies the magic of language. And as creative writers, it is this magic that we try to achieve when we engage with words. Well, when she talks about the language, the magic of language, I will not read it, but I remember reading what she wrote when she accepted the Sahitya Academy Award, and said that though she wrote in English, English was not her mother tongue. And in a very tongue-in-cheek manner, she describes the fact that if it were not in English, her language would not have been recognized by Sahitya Academy. Now, what she's trying to get at, I think, is that her wrestle with language was something that took her into many spaces, into a journey that, as Professor Malashri Lal mentioned, opened up the entire Northeast to the rest of the reading world. Now, I'm not here to discuss her work, but I would like to share a few personal experiences that I've had with her. Because when I first met her, when I joined the department, I discovered that she was not only an academic, but she was a woman with a singular vision. And that was to document what she knew about her own society. It drove her to write stories, gather stories, shatter myths. And when I talk about her being able to shatter myths, I have in mind her essay entitled Headhunting Some Thoughts, which is an essay that has been described for our PhD scholars. and at the same time to reintroduce old ones. And I remember that the manuscript of a book, it's become a book now, Our Naga Oral Tradition, was always in a bag in those days. That was in the early 1990s, when to be edited or to be added to at any moment. And I was familiar with the papers that were stapled together with notes that she wrote on the sides of a manuscript. The 5 years that she had spent at NEZCC had not been wasted, because here she was curating what she understood of her own society. And then I move on to December 2020, when I met her before she passed away. I had gone to Dimapur on an assignment from the university. I had gone there with my sister-in-law, Madam Nolas Aim, who is also a member of the department. And when we met her at Dimapur, I had a sense that Professor Temsula Au celebrated our time together, because she knew, with the kind of knowledge that she always had, that perhaps this would be the last time we'd be spending together. And when I say that she knew, I remember those conversations that I had with her, and she would tell me about endless nights when she could not sleep, because she seemed to have a prescient knowledge of something that's about to happen. And that was something that occurred to me when I met her that time. She was frail in body, but she was strong in spirit as always. And I knew that we weren't leftovers from her past, but part of a present that was still alive within her, through the innumerable memories that we shared together that evening. She inquired after each and every faculty and staff in the department and the dean's office, where she'd been dean for 2 memorable terms. This was who she was, remembering each one of us always. And that evening, I left her knowing that she was strong on the inside, always a private person who shared herself only through the stories that she first made me listen to in those days in the department when my room was opposite hers. The computer upon which she first penned her short stories was a spent-out, rickety old one. And given the computer skills that we had those days, Professor Au was mighty good at plucking away at the letters, one at a time with 1 or 2 fingers. The printer that she used was a slow inkjet dot matrix, and we would wait impatiently for a page to emerge, loaded with a wealth of words that we would read together, me snatching the paper away from her and lapping up her stories. She would sit at the computer when her work at the office was done until late in the evening, when all of us had left to write her stories, and that she so felt that were needed to be told. Now, I'll just share with you just 1 or 2 more memories, and then I'll move on to a poem, and then I'll hand it over. I'll request Dr. Preeti Nisha to read out the valedictory address. The staff at the Office of the Dean's School of Humanities will never forget her. Whenever I meet them, they always remember the days they had with her. There is love and appreciation when they describe her as the capable administrator that she was, efficient but humane, erring on the side of generosity, never taking anyone for granted. I learned from her to err on the side of giving and to give without measure, to carry on a tradition of friendship and affection, even with those you may not agree with. All the while, despite exhausting schedules that required constant travel that began to affect her back, this was when she had retired and she had joined the Nagaland State Women's Commission. Poems would be forming in her head, and she would snatch those moments of poetry to write them down so she could share them later with her readers. In those early days, she stuck to poetry. Fiction came later. We would swap stories and memories, and I would listen to her to tell me how poetry came to her, especially in the dead of night when she could not sleep. How she would shelve away those stray germs of poetry and then revisit them again and again. She was never one to talk about achievements, and I felt there was always a sense of grassroots connection with life. She had about her an aura of stillness within. Her words were measured out as if each thought came from a place deep within. She was the rock of our department. Anyone could go to her and expect nothing but the best that she could give. No exaggeration in this. And then, I don't think I should speak too much because I could go on and on, but I would just like to talk about her because she always struck me as being a feminist in the true sense of the word, accepting her destiny, but being proactive in charting out the course of her life. And she would tell me about her journey to Shillong that took her to take up a position as the superintendent of the women's hostel because she had no place to live. And she brought up her children single-handedly. And how for her, what she would do was to buy that important bag of rice so that she would be able to feed her children. Now, that's another story. But before I move on to her poem October, I would just like to say a few words about her memoir, Once Upon a Life, Burnt Curry and Bloody Rags. You know, I find that we've been talking a lot about her stories. When we read what's been written about her, I find that there's a lot written on her poetry, a lot written on her short stories, but nothing much has been mentioned about her memoir. And the memoir is a genre that has been very skillfully and very well, very courageously used by a number of women. And I think Professor Temsula Au, at the end of her career, had actually been able to gather her thoughts together and speak about things that she could never do so when she was much younger. Just a few thoughts that I would like to share with everyone here. She quotes Gore Vidal when she writes a memoir, when he says that a memoir is how one remembers one's life, while an autobiography is history requiring research, dates, and facts double-checked. But what we find in her memoir is that she navigates a difficult childhood. She tells us about how she navigates a difficult childhood and how she comes to terms with the tribulations of womanhood even before she was ready to embrace it. She got married immediately after a class 10. And one of the episodes that always touched me was that when she bought her wedding dress, with some of her relatives, she actually forgot the wedding dress in the shop, and they had to come back later to pick up her wedding dress. And we see how unready she was for the kind of life that was to follow. Through a range of words, she traversed through different universes, always moving us with an intensity to delve into the uncomfortable, the hidden, and the poetic. And when I talk about the hidden and the poetic, I would like to end this little introduction, this introductory note in the valedictory section with my quotation, my reading of a poem called October. She was born in October, and she always talked about going away at a time when, you know, it suited her, and she went away in the month of October. Now, the poem that she has entitled here is called October. October is the month which has a way with my heart and turns it nostalgic with its magic. October is the month when the winter is not yet a threat and the summer still a warm and lovely, just past happening. October is the month when the golden ray of the autumn sun luxuriates upon the abundance and ripeness all around. October is the month where I always want to be, daring winter and not letting summer go by. And when the time is ripe for me, I wish to depart with October in my heart. Professor Temsula Au, despite yourself, your voice echoes with new beginnings, new connections, and resonates with new discernments. Rest in peace with your maker. It was a privilege and an honor to have had the opportunity to work with you and learn so much from you. Thank you. Shall we move on to the next bit, and that is the valedictory address, which will be read out by Dr. Preethinecha Barman.
Thank you so much, respected Chairperson Madam. My respected sirs and madams from Sahitya Academy, as well as my dear colleagues and dear audience. First of all, a very good afternoon to one and all. I am honored to get the privilege to read out Professor K.C. Baral's valedictory address titled Temsula Au, the Poet. Thank you, Sahitya Academy, for giving me the opportunity. Here I read Sir Baral's speech. Today's seminar, having been postponed several times over the past year, has finally taken place. I am truly delighted to this moment. I would like to thank Professor Jyotirmoy Pradhani from the Department of English at NEHU for his unwavering commitment in organizing the event, as well as to Sahitya Academy, New Delhi, particularly Dr. Srinivas Rao, the Secretary, for extending the invitation to me as the valedictory speaker. Esteemed Chair, distinguished guests, colleagues, and student friends, I shared a profound personal and professional bond with Professor Temsula Au, and her passing has left a significant void in our literary community. Today, we come together to celebrate her legacy as a pioneering voice in the literature of Northeast India and as a creator of a unique literary identity. Let me start with Professor Au's self-reflection regarding her standing in the literary scene in India. She emphasized that for a writer from the periphery, recognition from readers and academia serves as a critical validation of her contributions. In her autobiography, Once Upon a Life, Burn Curry and Bloody Rags, she insightfully notes, I quote, "Interest in my work makes me believe that what I write resonates with the people and life in general. As a writer, I consider this the most crucial element of my work, that literature be relevant to life," unquote. She further acknowledges that literature possesses an inherent beauty and truth, giving rise to countless other unsung writers whose works can equally delight and inform. Literature is not merely a reflection of life, it embodies it. Temsula's personal struggles, articulated through her writing, resonate with the historical challenges faced by her community. Her narratives create a dialogue between individual experiences and community history, enriching readers' understanding of her work. Literature serves as a vehicle for representation, encapsulating both personal emotions and the collective memory of a community. As Chimamanda Adichie cautions in her discussion of the danger of a single story, simplifying that a single narrative can obscure the richness of diverse cultures. Au's work counters such reductive narratives. It represents a journey toward reclaiming identity, confronting the biases and violence experienced by her tribe. In my presentation today, I would like to focus on Temsula Au as a poet, even though she is widely recognized as a seasoned storyteller with 3 acclaimed short story collections, These Hills Call Home, Laburnum for My Head, and A Tombstone in My Garden, Stories from Nagaland. I believe her poetry has received less critical attention than it deserves in comparison to her story collections. Her poetry collections, songs that tell, songs that try to say, songs of many moods, songs from here and there, and songs from the other life, resonate with a distinctly cultural voice, each title incorporating the our word can, meaning song. Through her poetry, our transitions from personal experiences to broader cultural reflections, firmly rooting her work in her tribe's heritage. A thread of gender sensibility weaves through her writing in offering a woman's perspective as an author. In the poem Coming of Age, she proclaims how she started writing late to the symphony of life beyond 40. In this piece, she adopts a critical lens on a quote unquote strange place, depicting a world afflicted by violence and betrayal. In Songs That Try to Say, the poem Travel Note challenges the societal constraints on movement while Lessons of the Mountain captures the beauty of nature amidst human struggles. Au's reflections, particularly in Children of Man, offer a poignant critique of our people's vulnerabilities. Innocent of all knowledge that was once itself innocent, ignorant of the world and his ways, into which they were thrust by that last heave between life and death. These evocative lines comment on the innocence and vulnerability of the Naga people depicted as children of the same God in their struggle against discrimination from other man. Au's powerful poem, Stone People from Lungtarok, draws on the Au creation myth, emphasizing her rich cultural narrative. Through this myth, she raises significant questions about her people's historical relationship with nature. Stone people, savage and sage, who sprang out of Lungtarok. They were the worshippers of unknown, unseen spirits, of trees and forests, of stones and rivers, believers of souls. However, today they have changed, and so have their surroundings. Au's poetry transcends personal experience, emerging as a powerful voice for her Naga heritage. A recurring theme in her work is the resentment towards marginalization of her culture, often labeled as primitive by outsiders. Au does not shy away from exploring existential themes of life and death, evident in her poems titled Death and Dying. Loneliness is also a recurrent motif, revealing the human vulnerability that accompanies cultural introspection. Through these examinations, Au's poetry challenges readers to confront the complexities of identity and cultural change. Her later collections, Songs of Many Moods and Songs from Here and There, further delve into the emotional landscape of life while highlighting her struggles with creativity. In a striking metaphor, she writes, I quote, words are killing me like a long dead fetus entrapped in a dried up womb, unquote, encapsulating the frustrations of artistic creation. Despite this struggle, Au's work remains potent, exploring profound themes of sorrow and loss, as reflected in poems like Captive, Loneliness, Farewell, and Misery. In An Old Tree, she hints at existential contemplation. I'm an old tree waiting for what happens to all old trees. This evokes a deeper sense of disillusionment, a sentiment of lost connection permeates her poetry, as illustrated in My Hills, where the lost hills symbolize longing and a search for belonging. This theme extends to her story collection, These Hills Called Home, where she grapples with the drastic changes in her homeland and the profound loss of her community's essence. But today, I no longer know my hills. The bird song is gone, replaced by the staccato of sophisticated weaponry. The rivers are running red, the hillsides are bare, and the seasons have lost their magic. Her next volume bursts with vivid experiences showcasing the poet's keen observations of daily life. In poems like A Village Morning 2, and Village Morning 3, village life intertwines with the silent struggles of women. These verses not only capture the dawn of a new day but also illustrate a cyclical narrative where daily chores reflect both hardship and resilience. The village, however, witnesses historic changes that signify a transition from an old regime to a troubling new order. The old regime has given way and a new order has overtaken the habitat, grinning on children's faces painted with psychopathic stripes. The chaos unleashed by both the Indian army and the underground forces converts the simplicity of village life into a mayhem. The poet captures this upheaval reflecting on the epitaphs at the British cemetery in Kohima. Go home then and write an epitaph to the end of all mindless mayhem. The relentless violence endured by Ao's community does not provide catharsis. Instead, it inflicts deep wounds on the very fabric of imagination. While our poems carry the lingering ache of grief, akin to a seed poised to break through the earth, they also promise new growth. Songs from the Other Life, her final volume, marks a significant shift, exploring the byways of history in a quest to unearth its essential core and rewrite a narrative long shrouded in silence. These songs from the other life long lay mute in the confines of my restive mind, unrelenting in their urging for new vocabulary to redraft history. This collection deeply engages with the rich tapestry of Ao Naga oral culture, weaving tradition into each poem and including enlightening note on the cultural backdrop for readers. Poems like The Old Storyteller exemplify this continuity of storytelling even as they address the generational gap where the wisdom of elders is dismissed as ancient gibberish. The story is told of the moment when we broke into being from the six stones, how the first fathers found it. Warriors and tigers came alive through the tales, as did the various animals who were once our brothers, until we invented human language and began calling them savage. These lines open a new dimension in the collection, offering the potential for rewriting origin myths to solidify cultural identity. This act becomes essential for reclaiming a memory that is slowly slipping away. The old storyteller may gauge upon a vanishing past, but the writing on the wall becomes a stark plea for the younger generation to listen. Ao's anguish extends beyond cultural memory, it laments the erosion of identity itself. Who I am and of which clan, and most important of all, where I belong. A soul without a status is how I see myself, fettered to ply my trade on this designated route. Despite lofty ideals of universal brotherhood, our poems expose the harsh reality of cultural marginalization ingrained in history. Works like A Tiger Woman's Prayer, When a Stone Wept, The Last Hunt, and Trophies explore the richness of traditional belief systems, emphasizing their inherent value to the community. The final poem, Blood of Other Days, powerfully ties back to the opening poem History, highlighting the painful cost borne by a proud people amid historical injustices. We believed that our gods lived in the various forms of nature whom we worshipped with unquestioning faith. Then came a tribe of strangers into our primordial territories, armed with only a book and promises of a land called heaven, declaring that our trees and mountains, roads and rivers were no gods, and that our songs and stories nothing but tedious primitive nonsense. The blood of ancestors stains the very script imposed by outsiders, a cruel paradox. Forced to adopt this magic script, the community faces a stark choice, mimicry or erasure of identity. Temsula's voice pierces through this ambivalence, depicting a Naga past that is both cherished and mourned. Caught between fading traditions and struggling identity, the community feels adrift, a stark reminder of the profound cultural upheaval endured. Ao's work reveals a deeper truth that the Nagas themselves grapple with, understanding the forces that reshaped their world. The glorious past she evokes feels like a distant echo, while the present remains hazy and uncertain, underscoring the disorienting impact of colonization and a new faith. As we explore Au's poetry, we see her journey from subjects deeply personal to themes that interrogate broader social issues. Au's poems often resonate with themes of existentialism, loneliness, and cultural disenfranchisement, as cherished traditions are lost and the struggle to embrace a new life unfolds. The Naga people grapple with their identity. Au's voice reminds them of the ongoing quest to understand who they were, who they are, and what they aspire to become. Through her writing, Au highlights the power of literature to reflect on society, challenge assumptions, dismantle stereotypes, and foster a more inclusive understanding of shared human experience. Her work invites readers not only to confront her culture's struggles, but also to reflect on their own identities within broader questions of existence and culture. Ultimately, her poetry stands as a testament to survival, resilience, and a profound yearning for recognition and acceptance. So, this is what Sir has written. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Preeti Barman. That was Professor Baral on Professor Temsula Au. And as you were reading the paper, I couldn't help but remember those times when Professor Temsula Au and Professor Baral would sit and talk and chat with each other. And there was always the ubiquitous betel nut, the pan and the betel leaf that she would share with Professor Baral. And I remember Professor Baral actually going up to her and, putting in his request for the betel nut and pan. And they were very good friends. And he's done a very good reading of her poetry. He's run through the entire gamut of moods and feelings and what she actually thought. And it came to me as no surprise, because how well they understood each other, and moments when they would sit and talk with each other. Now, what also occurred to me when you read the paper was that perhaps this would form one part of some kind of a work in Professor Temsula Au, and then the next would be the work on fiction and the memoir, because as I said earlier on, I think the self, I don't want to call it the autobiographical self, but the self, the self in Professor Temsula Au is something which is very interesting and needs to be looked into. Thank you very much, Professor Barman, for having done your part very well. I think we now have Dr. Setulu Tunye to please give us the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Ma'am Esther. I'd like to take this opportunity to reflect a moment of incredible lectures we have had today. And as Temsula Au, as we remembered it today, is known to people as an educationist, to some a poet, a writer, ethnographer, and also at large the voice of the Northeast people. Au's writing flows through the life of the stories of people. It resonates with a distinctly cultural voice, firmly rooting her work in her tribe's heritage. She is the guardian, the story keeper, voice, and the mirror of the Naga society at large, where in her work, she brought the everyday lives of the Naga blurred between insurgency and counter-insurgency in the front of the world through her poetry, short stories, and memories. She has transcended the local to discover the universal. From the thought-provoking presentation of Professor Malhar Ranganathan, devoted educationist and keen researcher, helped us to revisit Au's literary world through fictions and short stories. Au's work to an insightful lecture, we also have seen from eminent and speaker, renowned educationist and enthusiast folklorist, Professor Desmond Karmafland, who will also help us walk down through the memory land of Temsula Au with his special bond with Temsula Au, the shared common interests they share through songs and writings. He also quote how life is a series of negotiations, and that's how Temsula Au also has done to her writings and to the people around her. Both of them have given us a valuable perspective to know Temsula Au as a person and as a writer. I also thank our esteemed speakers for sharing their knowledge and insights. The second session, my special thanks to Priti Nisha Burman who have read out the valedictory address of Professor Kaliyash Sibaral. Your enthusiasm and engagement has created a dynamic enriching environment. Professor K. Baral's speech has enlightened us with a fresh perspective and renewed inspirations on Temsula Au's poems, who meticulously explores poetry and gives us an insight about the writing journeys from subjects deeply personal to themes that interrogate borders, social issues, themes of existentialism, loneliness, cultural diffranchisement, and a thread of gender sensibilities weaved through her poetry. Her writing stands a testament to survival, also a resilience, a profound yearning for recognitions and acceptance. My heartfelt thanks to our Dean, Professor Munmun Mazumdar and Professor Esther Siam, who not only sparing to your busy schedule, but also readily consented to chair the session. I would also like to take a moment to extend my sincere gratitude to our collaborator, Sahitya Academy. Your support has been invaluable, and it has been enabled us to bring together such a diverse and knowledgeable group of participants to listen to an insightful and engaging series of lecture from the experts. My special thanks to our sponsor SFES for the financial assistance, and I would also like to convey my thanks to Professor Kimpan Singh Nongri, head of the department, and the faculty members, non-teaching staff of the department for the support in making the symposium success. I also extend my warm thank you to all the participants. Your participation and engagement have enriched our sessions and created a vibrant atmosphere. The connections made and the shared ideas here are what truly makes a symposium worthwhile. To conclude, I'd like to pay my immense tribute and respect to Temsula Au for being the voice of the voiceless, particularly in Nagaland. Through her writings, she has introduced the microcosm of the bittersweet Naga world to the rest of the world. Rest in peace. You will continue to live in the hearts of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Setoli. I think with that, we come to the end.
Okay.
If there's anything from Sahitya Academy.
Yeah, before that, I also, once again, I thank Sahitya Academy. I thank the entire team of Sahitya Academy, and of course, Professor Malashri Lal, who was instrumental in actually having this particular seminar a reality. And thank you so much to Krishna Kimahuneji. Thank you, Sivarameshwarji. And also thanks to Srinivas Rao of Sahitya Academy.
Well, the significant symposium comes to an end here. As Setalu said, Temsula Au will continue to live in our hearts. Deep respect and love for her where she is. I heartily thank Professor Malashri Lalji for recommending to have this seminar and being so keen to have at least online, if not possible physical. And thanks Professor Prodhani and all the speakers. Although we missed Professor Mrinal Meri and Professor Sujata Meri, it has been a wonderful experience. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And thanks to all the students and scholars there.